Hi friends, welcome to IT Articles. In this tutorial, we're going to see the promises in JavaScript. Let's see this example. Here we are not using the promises, but we are using the callbacks. If we want to display user informations, how will we doing it? In this function, which is responsible to get the user information from the server. Although here we are using a set timeout just to demonstrate the async behavior. So if you see, after 1 second I say that I am able to fetch the user information, then I want to display the user information. How we do it? We pass the callback function. That callback function will be called here once the user information is in our hand. So if we execute this on console, so I'll be using the node just to run this script. You see, it took some time and then display the user information, and it worked as expected. So before converting this example or with a promise, first let's understand the basic of this promise. So we can create the instance of promise using a class promise, which is new in ES6, and this promise actually accepts a one argument, that is a function which is generally known as an executor, and this function actually have two arguments. One is resolve and reject. At this line we start calling all the async code. So let's say here we'll be using a timeout, set timeout, to again demonstrate the async behavior, and when everything is done as expected or all good, then we'll be calling the resolve. And if something is wrong or some error occurred and we want to return a error, then we'll be calling a reject, and here we can pass some error here, so like new error, and we can pass my own error. And of course in resolve we can pass some values also, or some complex object, or simply by 1 2 3 or hello or whatsoever we want, or whatsoever value we fetched from async function. This p, which is the instance of promise, initially will have status as pending, and that will be changed to fulfilled when we call the resolve, or it will be changed to rejected if we call the reject. Similarly, the value initially will be undefined, and then the value will be changed to the value which we have passed in resolve or in reject. But the value and the status of the promise is its internal property, so we can't directly access these status and the property. For that we'll be using few functions, that is then or catch or finally. So how will we doing it? Let's demonstrate a little bit. So we have a instance of promise, then we'll have a then. If you see, it accepts the two arguments, on fulfilled, which is a function, and on rejected, which is again a function, right? So this can have a two arguments, one function, and again we can have another function. So this function will be called if we are calling the result, and this function will be called when we are calling the reject. Similarly, we can use the catch also. Catch will accept only one function, and that will be called on reject only, but not on resolve, and when the previous then has not catch this reject. Means if the previous then has two functions, on fulfillment and on rejected, then this catch will not do anything, because this then itself has got this rejected error. But this second parameter is optional, so if you removed it, then this error will be propagated to the catch, and resolve will be propagated, this resolve value will be propagated to the then. Similarly, in finally we can have some sort of code that we want to execute always without being considered if the previous async call was successful or reject. So here we can have, let's like close file if we have opened any. So as of now we'll be displaying console log promise done, and here we can have like we'll be receiving some data. So let's say here will be console the data. Similarly in catch, if we have the error, so we'll console the error here. So how it will happen now, let's see once again. This then will be called if this p executed successfully, or we call the resolve, then this then will be called. If we call the reject, then this catch will be called, and this finally will be called either we have called the resolve or reject. So now let's convert this function with the promise. So first thing is to create a new promise instance. So new promise. Promise, as mentioned, will have executor that will have two parameters, resolve and reject, and pull all this code, all async code inside the promise. So now we'll come here and we'll paste. Okay, and instead of when we are calling the callback, we'll be calling the resolve or reject as per the condition. So here when everything goes well, we'll be calling the resolve. That's all, but don't forget to return this promise. And now there is no need to pass the callback. Here, because we don't have the callback, we'll not be passing this callback. And now this function get user will return you a promise, and you know that on promise we can chain, then catch, and finally. So let's remove this, or let's copy this code from here, and let's remove this, and now we'll chain this function here on this get user function, which is returning promise. Now let's run this code, node script. See, it works same as earlier and it works as expected. It console the data here, there is no error, so it do not went to the catch block, but it went to the finally block, and finally it write promise turn. And let's say instead of resolve, if we are passing the reject, so let's see how it works then. So now if we are running it again, okay, we are passing the user data, that's why this is passing the user data in catch, and it consoling the user data. So that's why you can see it's the same behavior, but when we are calling the reject, we will not be passing the data. Why? Because we will not have the data because some error occurred, so we will not have the actual data, or instead of passing the user data in reject, we will be passing the some error, my own error, some error occurred. And if we come back to the console, and now if we run node script, and if we are running it, see, it console your error, and still it is executing the finally block. So here actually we'll be calling the display function that we have here, right, this display user. So now we'll have the, we'll call this function which will return you a promise, and this data will be the user information. So let's revert it back to the resolve. Now this data is this user information, and here we'll be calling our display and we'll pass that data, or better to name it as user. Let's log one extra line here just to show you that this calling this function under display user. So if we come back here, if execute it, you see under user display it console user information, and finally it is writing or this line because of this final block. So this is how you can use the promise in your code. That's all in this video guys. Thank you so much.